tortured. And previously classified documents about the interrogation program approved by President Bush's White House are said to show just how far some people were prepared to go to get intelligence. So if the laws on torture were broken, who, if anyone, should be in the dock?
The harsh interrogation of terror suspects was the focus of...
Scores of other terror suspects, including many at Guantanamo Bay, were subjected to harsh interrogation methods.
The White House today found itself facing a barrage of criticism over releasing the so-called torture memos.
There's new information about the frequency and severity of the use of waterboarding.
The darkest secrets of the Bush era are spilling out. Torture, in all its graphic detail, has permeated the civilized suburbs of America. About half the country thinks Bush did the right thing. Beatings, caging people, sleep deprivation. Oh, and a cappuccino, please. The rest of the country is deeply horrified.
War criminals deserve no bail.
We say
lock them up.
Even in this conservative part of Southern California, it's now getting harder to completely escape the increasing emotions around the issue of torture. Now that people know how far Bush's interrogation program went, they want to know who authorized the program and why.
It's the moral issues that are stirring people up, but we're not going to ask if torture works or is justifiable. Congressmen have called for prosecutions. We set out to answer this. Was a crime committed? The events of 9/11 changed America. It felt weak. In the spring of 2002, the world's most powerful nation hit a target. Finally, America caught its first suspected al-Qaeda leader, a man called Abu Zubaydah.
We recently apprehended one of al-Qaeda's top leaders. He was spending a lot of time as one of the top operating officials of al-Qaeda, plotting and planning murder. He's not plotting, and he's not planning anymore. He's under lock and key, and we're gonna give him some company.
CIA agent John Kiriakou led the team that captured Abu Zubaydah in Pakistan.
He was the most important counter-terrorist capture in American history to that point. We had never caught any terrorist who was that important up until that time.
His prize captive was riddled with bullets. They rushed him to hospital. John Kiriakou was the first to talk to him.
He asked me to smother him with a pillow.
He wanted you to kill him?
Yeah, he wanted me to kill him. I think he just wanted to be put out of his misery.
What did you say to him?
I said, absolutely not. And I said, we have big plans for you. A lot of people have been looking for you for a long time, and we want to talk to you.
Abu Zubaydah, a 30-year-old, was about to be put through what CIA insiders call the program.
What is the program?
The program is the list of approved enhanced techniques, enhanced interrogation techniques.
Which are what?
Which are highly classified.
John Kiriakou told us he was taken to a CIA secret prison. The location is classified. An FBI official has said the tactics used next were like voodoo science. Abu Zubaydah was stripped, beaten, and worse.
I was then placed in the small box. They placed a cloth or cover over the box to cut out all light and restrict my air supply. As it was not high enough even to sit upright, I had to crouch down.
They called it a dog box. It was a squat box that all you could do is be sort of crouched down in a fetal position. If you have to relieve yourself, you relieve yourself in the box. And if you have to drink, you go without it. If you vomit, it's in the box with you for extended periods.
John Kiriakou had flown back to America and was monitoring the interrogation from CIA headquarters in Virginia. He said Abu Zubaydah was then strapped to a board.
They wrapped his face in some kind of material. The feet are slightly elevated, and then there's a bladder placed above the person's face, and from the bladder water is poured. The idea is to make the person feel like he's drowning. Psychologically and emotionally, it's a very traumatic thing to have to go through.
I vomited. I struggled against the straps, trying to breathe, but it was hopeless. I thought I was going to die.
Under American law, torture is defined as an act specifically intended to inflict severe physical or mental pain or suffering. A type of waterboarding was first used in the Spanish Inquisition. The Khmer Rouge also used it. Its proponents in America say you just think you're drowning.
It's not simulated drowning, it's simulated death. He would have drowned if they didn't raise him up.
The law defines severe mental pain. It says it's caused by, amongst other things, the threat of imminent death. Declassified documents show the CIA went beyond the pale, waterboarding Abu Zubaydah at least 83 times. But the key point here is the act itself. American courts have prosecuted waterboarding for over 50 years and called it torture. There's a compelling case that this was a crime. Who then is guilty? The interrogators? Possibly, only if there's proof they exceeded limits authorized from above.
Anytime an officer wanted to use an enhanced technique on Abu Zubaydah, he had to send a cable back to CIA headquarters, to the Deputy Director for Operations, and he had to specifically ask for permission to use a specific enhanced technique. And he had to explain why he wanted to use that enhanced technique.
So this was choreographed by
Absolutely.
the CIA in Washington?
Absolutely.
But who gave the CIA its orders? Soon after Abu Zubaydah was captured, the National Security Council held a series of secret meetings in the White House. The CIA presented America's leaders with the techniques they wanted to use on their captive. From newly released documents, we can be confident the White House looked at a list that included waterboarding, confinement in a box, smashing Abu Zubaydah against a flexible wall, and more. The White House leaders indicate they did not give their policy approval at this stage. They just asked their lawyers to tell them if the techniques were legal. The key lawyers at the time, considering detainee and interrogation issues, were David Addington, who worked for Vice President Cheney, Jim Haynes, who represented Donald Rumsfeld, John Yoo and Jay Bybee, legal advisors to the president, and Alberto Gonzalez, the president's official lawyer. We went to an archive in Washington where hundreds of pages of emails and memos the lawyers wrote during the Bush years have been meticulously filed away. Many of these have long been top secret. No wonder. First, the lawyers swept away much of the Geneva Conventions with legal arguments. They went on to validate the Bush administration's interrogation program carefully and step by step through the law. What's emerging from all of this is that the Bush administration constructed a giant legal edifice that justified torture and that sought to provide cover for those that authorized it. The central document dates August 2002. In it, the lawyers simply redefined torture so that techniques could be searingly painful and not technically be torture. Torture, the memo said, has to cause pain equal to serious physical injury, such as organ failure or even death. And severe mental pain has to cause psychological harm of significant duration, lasting for months or even years.
I'm just going to make some statements.
At a debate in a small college in Southern California, we tracked down the lawyer behind this memo. This is him. He's called John Yoo.
Professor Yoo.
He's willing to speak in front of locals about the issues, but he wouldn't talk to us, nor would any of the other lawyers involved. Their glory days are over.
Well,
like to thank the Chancellor.
John Yoo went further than the other lawyers in his memos. His arguments have suggested that in wartime, the president could legally give an order to gouge out an eye. He says in all of this, he was just making legal points.
The memos are about legal interpretation. They're not about policy. They don't urge the policymakers to take any particular course of action. They're quite upfront about that.
But the accusation is that the lawyers' memos were effectively instruction manuals on how to break the law that bans torture. Recently declassified memos contain the lawyers' reply to the CIA's request to use harsh techniques on Abu Zubaydah. They went into extraordinary detail.
We understand each of the techniques to be as follows. Cramped confinement involves the placement of the individual in a confined space, usually dark.
The CIA only considered the next technique.
You would like to tell Zubaydah that you intend to place a stinging insect into the box with him. You would in fact place a harmless insect such as a caterpillar in the box with him. You would like to use a technique called the waterboard. Airflow is slightly restricted for 20 to 40 seconds due to the presence of the cloth.
So one last thing I'll say is, was it worth it? Well, we haven't had an attack in more than 7 years.
But who was driving all this? The lawyers or their bosses? The White House shifted it over to the lawyers.
We knew that Zubaydah had more information that could save innocent lives. But he stopped talking. And so the CIA used an alternative set of procedures. The Department of Justice reviewed the authorized methods extensively and determined them to be lawful.
But a recent Senate report and our own investigations show senior leaders were actively pushing for alternative interrogation methods right from the start. Donald Rumsfeld's legal office and the CIA both contacted this secretive military training program called SEER in their trawl for new interrogation techniques. In the program, American soldiers are subjected to grueling abuses by trainers. They're taught how to cope in captivity. Both the CIA and the military ultimately based their interrogation programs on SEER. This is explosive information because this is a program based on torture. And it's torture with a sinister psychological element. The program is based partly on a condition called learned helplessness.
Open mouth! Open mouth!
What is learned helplessness?
Learned helplessness is a psychological paradigm. It comes from early animal studies where the animals were administered pain under repeated circumstances, and they quickly learned that they were unable to do anything, to act in a certain way that would either stop the pain or avoid it, and they completely capitulated.
The SEER program is partly based on techniques the Chinese used on American captives in Korea in the 50s. American soldiers had been put in cages like dogs, stripped naked and isolated for long periods. Survivors said their minds were quietly and diabolically destroyed. The term brainwashing was coined because compliance followed and false confessions.
How can I go back and face my family